The rhetorical question is there a crisis in the Garda Síochána? And if there is, what's causing it? And is it just a single episode, or is it a much wider systemic or strategic problem? And the short answer to my own question is, of course, there is a crisis in the Garda Síochána, because you can see the evidence for it when the associations, the sergeants and the inspectors marched to Garda headquarters to protest, and when the Garda Representative Association decide that they are going to hold a national ballot on the question of confidence in the Commissioner. Those two factors alone indicate there is a big problem in the Garda Síochána right now. And the other side of it is there is a perception or reality that there is widespread concern at the lack of visible policing service in many parts of the country, and that is a fact. That is what the perception is. The plain fact of the matter is that there was one classic own goal in 2019 which has given rise to a series of circumstances that had now brought the crisis that was simmering along within the Garda Síochána to a head. And that's the decision to introduce a totally disruptive and unnecessary police and operating model under the guise of reform. I'm simply going to examine the impact of those decisions and the relative actions of both Minister and Commissioner at the time and the principles underlying it. When discussing the Garda Síochána, I think it's important to have an understanding on who the key power players in the operation of the Garda Síochána are. And fundamentally, it's very direct and clear. The Minister for Justice, together with the Secretary of the Department of Justice, have very considerable powers, both by practice but also by law. And in turn, the Commissioner is in the number 3 position in terms of reports to both to the Minister and Secretary General of the Department of Justice. Now, many people may not like that, but that is the factual legal position. So the law is that the Minister for Justice, as set out in Section 25 of the relevant Act, following the approval of the government, the Minister may issue to the Garda Commissioner written directives concerning any matter relating to the Garda Síochána. I think those words are important. Concerning any matter relating to the Garda Síochána. For instance, the Commissioner has to submit an annual policing plan, which I think in the first instance goes to the policing authority, but is ultimately approved by the Minister for Justice. And that means that the Minister is in a pivotal position when it comes to any change, and particularly so when it comes to any major change like we're going to discuss. So it's important to have an understanding of who exercise authority in relation to the policies being put forward by the Commissioner of the Garda Síochána at any one time. The comments by the Minister Flanagan in the Dáil, in relation to what was a new Garda operating model in 2019, the announcement of it by the Commissioner, is quite intriguing. Now, as it is always when looking at government announcements, I think it's probably important to read exactly what they're saying and to understand, is there any hidden nuance that we haven't quite figured out? But anyway, what he said was, as I have previously confirmed, I was informed by the Commissioner's decision about the location. Now, the word location is very interesting. But anyway, he goes on to say about the location of the new divisional and regional headquarters on the morning of the 25th of September 2019, shortly before the official announcement. Interestingly, he doesn't make a comment, at least in this statement, about the boundaries of the new divisional and regional headquarters. He's just simply talking about the location. And without an explanation from the good minister, it's not possible to see if there is a Jesuitical use of the word location as distinct to the boundaries of regions and divisions. However, that's a matter for him or her to explain. Then he goes on to say, neither I nor my officials were previously consulted in relation to the choice of these locations. Again, locations, nothing about boundaries, in accordance with the law. The decision on the location of Garda divisional and regional headquarters is and was solely a matter for the Garda Commissioner and his management team. This is the case in accordance with the Garda Síochána Act of 2005, under which the allocation of Garda resources and deployment of Garda personnel are for the Commissioner. Now, this reply is not entirely factually or legally correct, although it may be Jesuitically accurate in a sense if he's talking about locations. But however, the bigger picture is, in simple terms, the Commissioner cannot do a solo run. The law, we just saw a minute ago, provides differently. He must report to the Minister on all matters, and the Minister has the power to issue directives to the Commissioner which he or she is obliged to comply with. This was the big idea in 2019, a new operating model for the Garda Síochána produced by the Commissioner. And one can see at a glance the enormous size of this idea, which incidentally was not based on any research, on any qualitative comparative study on the relative benefits that would accrue from such a change, other than bland statements as we will see a little later. But anyway, to be specific, these changes would directly affect 14,279 sworn Garda officers and 2,332 civilian staff, those figures for December 2019. 427 stations would be directly affected by boundary changes. All 535 stations would be impacted by the changed role of district officers, that's superintendents. Garda districts would remain unchanged at 96, but their superintendents will be reassigned to something called functional divisional duties. All administration will be reallocated to 19 divisional headquarters instead of the previous 26, and the 6 Garda regions will be reduced to 4, thereby creating new super regions. Now, the work of the Commission on the Future of Policing has been blamed or credited with these proposals, and of course the new operating model does not follow the Commission on the Future of Policing proposals, and it's easy to disprove that when one looks at the detail. But back to the proposals themselves. These were hypothetical proposals. They were based on assumptions and presumptions which were unprecedented, untested and uncosted. And I repeat again, these proposals were unprecedented, untested and uncosted. And there was no economic or operational impact study undertaken on the initiative. In my humble view, based on my experience and many colleagues, the proposals are intrinsically destructive, and they pose an existential threat to the form of policing formerly practiced by An Garda Síochána. And I don't make that judgment lightly. Any knowledgeable, experienced member of the Garda organisation could easily explain the absolute fallacy of the proposals. One of the great benefits of experience is to be able to recognise patterns and trends. These proposals for structural change is supposedly based on the Commission on the Future of Policing. That is not the case. That is not the case. So let's look at the impact evidence and see what we can learn from that. Just simply re-emphasising the point, the numbers don't lie. The Garda frontline numbers are falling remarkably. 2019, Garda rank 11737, 11,737. 2023, Garda rank 11,187. And of course, the point I made already is, apart from the obvious drop in numbers, the big challenge for management and for the politicians is, how now do you use those numbers to greater effect, or what do you have to do to augment the service for them? This slide is intended to give a pretty simple and basic overview of the Garda structure insofar as it relates to uniform policing. And it comes with a slight health warning, because some of the figures here are those shown in relation to the new operating model, or the new policing model, and some of the recommendations or suggestions have not been implemented. But effectively, if all of the recommendations of the new operating model were implemented, this is what it would look like. There would be 4 regions, 19 divisions, 96 districts and 535 stations. But principally, some of the changes in relation to the divisions have not been implemented, and is not sure at what stage they're at as it stands presently. In 1995, a decision was taken to introduce the concept of regionalisation to Garda operational and administrative activity countrywide, and that resulted in the creation of 6 regions along pretty arbitrary lines of demarcation. The possible exception would be in the Dublin metropolitan region, which always was quite unique because of its size as the capital city, population, crime indicators, all of that. But little or no research was done for that particular regionalisation project, other than that assistant commissioners were allocated to different centres around the country in order to give effect to it. For instance, the assistant commissioner for the northern region at that stage was based in Sligo, western region in Galway, southern in Cork, and so on right around the country. And that remained the case for, well, right up to the current time, when in 2023, now, as it is now, but following the 2019 proposals, the decision was made to reduce these 6 regions to 4. And now we are faced with this gigantic, cumbersome apparatus. For instance, if we look at the northwestern region, and we can see the size of that, we go all the way from Galway to Carlingford Lough, the Inishowen Peninsula, and we take in the border of 300 miles between the Republic and Northern Ireland. And the officer with responsibility for controlling that, and a great sympathy for that person, is based here in Galway, with responsibility for command, both operational and administrative, for that entire area. And so it goes on for the other regions as well. Now, the significant issue is that this is not demographically rational. There is no natural cohesive area that can be geographically policed or administered using those kind of delineations. It absolutely makes no sense, other than it adds another enormously cumbersome layer between the top of the organisation and the ground floor policing. Now, do bear in mind that I mentioned already that the large number of stations within that who are charged with providing the operational policing response are all affected by this. So you are disrupting everything, both operationally and administratively, without any hint of suggestion that it will get somebody to your door or my door more quickly, more efficiently, and more effectively than heretofore. Now, when we look at these two maps, we're looking at the divisional boundaries, which is the second tier down. If you remember, we were talking about region as being the bigger areas, then divisions are within the regional areas, and this number has been reduced from the 1995 to now what is in 2023, a suggestion, although it has not been completed in all cases. A classic point here relates to Donegal. In Donegal, there's a large protest from the locals who say that this does not make demographical or operational sense for the Garda, or in plain language, it doesn't make sense if you're a member of the public and you want Garda assistance, because Chief Superintendent now has to cover all of that area with his or her staff. And it just simply, again, makes no demographical, operational or administrative sense. And it is a clear part of the strange idea that this is a way to improve the efficiency of the guards and to improve the service to the community. And there are many other amalgamations down in Cork. A division has disappeared there. The Cork North division, which was here, has now been amalgamated into Cork West. So the Cork North and the Cork West division now has become one. It's administered by a chief superintendent or operationally controlled based here in Bandon. He goes all the way out to the tip of West Cork and then down to the Waterford border. You know, again, you're looking for some kind of a demographical or operational sense, and it simply isn't there. Same happened in Clare and Tipperary. They have now been amalgamated. The same happened with Mayo and Roscommon and Longford. You have this long, convoluted division that runs all the way from Galway right down to the borders of Meath and Westmeath and Cavan Monaghan. So this is the thing. You cannot find an operational rationale that makes sense. But particularly, you can see how this benefits the service to the public. Another development has been the establishment of 4 regional control centres, as I understand it, principally to take 3-9 calls, but possibly also other calls from the requiring assistance from the public. Now, at this stage, one is hearing very distressing suggestions that this has resulted in a kind of a ping-pong arrangement where calls are being taken from, say, a location here, and they are transferred down, say, to Galway here to be processed here at the control centre, evaluated, then a resource allocated to that, and go back to the station where it came from. And this pattern is allegedly reported right around the country. Now, at the very least that would contain, if that is the case, is a huge time delay between the time for action and the time for response. And the same would apply from Cork or from Waterford. Dublin may be slightly different. But certainly the jury is out on the regional control centres because of those, what has been alleged in terms of the ping-ponging, if I can use that expression, of calls from the point of a person seeking help to the local station, then to the control centres, and then back out to the location. Obviously, that is a serious issue if that is how it's been done, and certainly it needs explanation. And it is another example of the new system, or the new approach. Now, I have absolutely nothing against the idea of modern, efficient control centres taking and processing calls. But like everything else, there has to be a demographic and an operational proving of those control centres, and it should be seen that it will deliver the service, very simply, quickly, more efficiently, and reliably. That's the key bit. It's not even so much where the call taking centre is, but is the service to the public enhanced by it? And that's something that reassurance is needed on quite markedly. Some time ago I published a paper on the assumptions inherent in the new operating model. And here on this slide, I'm just looking at some of the key assumptions made by the Commissioner in furtherance of the model. The first one there, 1.3, that there would be more frontline Gardaí. Well, we know now there's 550 less in 2023 than there was in 2019. He also argued that this would not mean 19 mini police services. I was referring to the divisions, but in actual fact, that's exactly what they are, because the authority in a newly enhanced division would belong with the chief superintendent in charge of that division, and in effect that becomes its own empire within the region and then within the national outline. International best practice, I know of no model that advocates this system of international best practice, although there is some similarity, some of the policing practices, I think, in Northern Ireland. Dr. Kathleen O'Toole headed up the Commission on the Future of Policing, and part of the fiction in this, that the recommendations being made, the changes being made, are as a result of the Commission on the Future of Policing. This is not true in many, many respects. At 1.7, another assumption was that there was a magical number of between 600 and 800 guards that would be the effective number for policing a division. Again, that has no relationship to the size, the demographics, the geographical distance, the particular incidents in those divisions, whether it's urban, rural or border. Again, it's a magic number without any foundation. He has also argued that there won't be 19 super administration units, but in effect that's exactly what you will have, because there is a separate administrative civilian structure being created within the Garda Síochána, which mirrors the Garda operational one. And of course, if there are 19 super divisions, then there will be 19 super administration units. It's also argued that these changes will mean a flatter structure. Nothing could be further from the truth. Every new barrier that has been put in distances the effective frontline policing response from the headquarters level. And that simply, again, doesn't make sense. It is not a flatter structure, it is a longer, a more difficult structure for information to get from the operational front of house operating model to the very top of the organisation. Another assumption was that there would be roster reform. Clearly that is not the case. Roster reform is one of the main bones of contention at the moment between the Commissioner and the Garda associations. And of course, from a public service point of view, the question of roster reform is very relevant. I mean, do we have people at the time that are going to serve our needs at the greatest time? All of that is a very significant part of the idea of rostering and roster reform. But clearly the new operating model does not deliver rostering reform. Fundamentally, of course, is how are the public involved in this exercise? How are they still involved in it? Have they been asked or given any opportunity to respond, to complain? And yes, there has been some debate at the Joint Policing Committee level in each county or in pieces of counties where there has been, it has to be said, critical analysis of the effect of the new operating model on the quality of the policing service in each respective areas. But fundamentally, I've learned, I think, a long time ago, if one's going to change anything, one has to create what I think is largely called a constituency for change. Enough of people in one's own organisation has to subscribe to the change, and in this case, enough in the public domain has to agree with the change. And of course, one has to be able to demonstrate in a clear way the advantages of doing it in a different way. The assumptions underlying the new operating model do not give any confidence that that is the case. It is obvious from the evidence that there is a crisis or a series of crises in An Garda at the present moment. It came to notice primarily because of the egregious attack on the American tourist in Dublin, but that is merely a symptom of a wider problem. And I believe the evidence says that the wider problem is the dysfunctional and disruptive operating model that was introduced in 2019 that has pulled apart the Garda Síochána in a way that was never intended, that has disrupted the shape, size and tenor of the organisation with many difficulties both internally and with a difficulty in terms of providing a uniform policing presence on the streets and on the country and in the towns around the country. That is the biggest single problem. Of course, the short-term numbers problem can be mitigated to some degree in locations by the introduction of overtime or other measures, but that is merely almost a knee-jerk reaction to the problems that are there. And the problem that's there is that main crisis that arises from that dysfunctional and disruptive operating model. Clearly, an examination is required of that, and that should be in a position to either continue the operating model if that can be justified, modify it if that makes sense, or abandon it in the light of the available evidence. Of course, both the Minister and the Commissioner should be in public and in a public fora, possibly a Dáil committee, explaining why the operating system works and giving us the rationale and the reason why it makes sense to pursue this. You've already seen in this presentation the degree to which it has disrupted the organisation, the huge change in every single station in the country. Every single station in the country. Every member of the Garda Síochána is affected by it, and that's both Garda and civilian. Clearly, this is a situation that cannot continue, and the solution cannot be seen in short-termism. Now, of course, I should say on the positive side that there have been many successes in the Garda experience of the last number of years. And of course, An Garda Síochána has coped very well with the big challenges that were thrown to it by COVID. And there have been many policing successes, both in the uniform side and also in the crime investigation side or in the special protection of the state. Many successes in the last number of years, but that is not the issue that we're confronted with here. We're confronted with here with the spectacle that it is not possible on the current scheme of things to provide a adequate or more than adequate policing uniform presence on the streets to assist the community, to protect the community and to reinforce the long established connection between the community and An Garda Síochána. Clearly, things must change.